Well, according to economists at the Bureau for Economic Research, South Africans should brace themselves for yet another interest rate hike come July. This has brought more concerns as it comes off the research company 8020's 2023 first quarter in June, which revealed that the South African middle class and affluent households are under immense stress. The report shows that this section of the society is struggling to make vehicle and home loan repayments while relying on credit cards to make it through the month. Home loans are causing significant pain for consumers, with a steep 27% year-on-year increase in average mortgage installments due largely to rising interest rates. Now, the 50 basis point interest rate hikes in March and May have brought the prime lending rate now to 11.75%. This is the highest it's been since 2009. And to discuss this, we are joined by Professor Chris Malikane. He is an associate professor of economics at the University of Witwatersrand. Professor Malikane, such a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for joining us to discuss this very important issue.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning to the listeners.
So, a lot of people sitting and listening to this and saying, why are we discussing the middle class? Because, there are many people that can't even afford to buy food, never mind to pay off cars and things like that. So I suppose it's important to begin the conversation by asking, how important is the contribution of the middle class to any economy, and what role does the middle class actually play?
The middle class is very important. To me, it's like a spearhead of the economy. It's a tiny group, but at the same time, it is this engine that keeps the economy going. For example, in South Africa, there's no doubt that the middle class is a source of employment to a large section of the working class, particularly when it comes to domestic work and other associated activities. And secondly, because South Africa does not have a comprehensive social protection system, the middle class then plays that role of providing social protection for the vast majority of people who are unemployed and those that earn low incomes. The middle class is also, for me, the seatbelt of the skills in the economy. They are the ones that make the economy turn, innovation and so forth is coming from the middle class. And we're talking about a modern economy here that is operating in a very competitive global economy. So without a very vibrant, strong, particularly professional, skilled section of the population, then your economy becomes very, very uncompetitive and inefficient in many ways.
Yeah, and it's very difficult when you sort of see where we're at right now. And, a lot of the middle class that you talk about, they've got their houses, there's cars, there's a lot of debt that is accumulating. And I mean, if we have to factor in there was the payment holidays that were issued by a lot of the banks and during the COVID time, and then of course playing catch up and now seeing interest rates. I mean, we've seen interest rates, if I'm not mistaken, at around about 425 basis points. We've seen increases to that effect taking place. I mean, we're sitting at 14-year highs. There is an expectation that we may see another 25 basis point increase when the repo rate is decided this month as well. It's becoming completely unaffordable, and the debt levels are spiking so high. What does that do to the economy of a country as well? And do you think the Reserve Bank is doing enough to assist?
Well, the middle class, insofar as it is skilled and it tends to earn relatively higher levels of income, and because of its qualification, it's easy for it, compared to the working class, to have access to credit. And if you look at South Africa, income distribution is so bad that what we consider to be the middle class is largely the upper section of the working class. Mm-hmm. But this upper section of the working class has got access to credit. And it uses this credit to supplement the insufficient salaries, because the salaries of the middle class are as suppressed as the salaries of the working class when we look at them from the historical point of view. Now, one of the key things about the middle class is that it occupies those jobs that are relatively more, they are less precarious. compared to the working class. So when that class, the middle class, is facing a strain and is beginning to default, or a large chunk of their incomes gets directed to payment of debt, then you have a problem of demand, aggregate demand on the one side, because the demand that the middle class generates in turn leads to employment of the working class. So the reduction of that demand has a deleterious or a negative impact on the livelihoods of the working class. Now, in terms of what the Reserve Bank has been doing, clearly, it's not going to solve the problem. It's going to just create more woes, more difficulties, more stress for the middle class. So, if I was not the Reserve Bank but Treasury, I would come with innovative ways to cushion the middle class, particularly when it comes to essential items such as housing or mortgage payments. I think that the interest rate is a blunt instrument, and there needs to be policy measures that are implemented to come up with differential interest rates for essential items such as housing, such as certain industries and so forth. But these proposals are just rejected out of hand when they are made. They don't want to think about alternative policies.
Yeah, and that could be one of the problems, because we're not the only country in the world where we are seeing a disappearing middle class, and this is a very dangerous position to be in. It really is. When we look at the latest credit stress report by Consumer Analytics, and this is that research company 80/20 for the 2023 first quarter, it's painting a very bleak picture for South Africa's middle class and affluent households. I mean, they basically show that the group of people that they looked at is now spending 70% of their monthly income just to cover debt installments. And this is a big and harsh reality. What are your views on that? And I imagine that this is, when we talk 70%, I imagine it's even higher than that.
Yes, that is just an average, because there are people who are paying even more. But without access to that credit, because some people say, no, they need to suffer because they got credit more than they can afford. But the fact of the matter is that this is a credit economy, and without the access to that credit, they would not have had access to housing. They would not have had access to means of transport, because again, our country has got a very poor public transport system, which requires this spearhead of the economy, which is the middle class, to be mobile, to move around. Because if it cannot get to work on time and be in a relatively comfortable position to exercise its faculties, because the key thing about the middle class is the skill, that needs to be protected, that needs to be reproduced, together with the equipment that is required, like your computers and so forth. You can't have, for example, middle class people walking around with very expensive laptops in an environment where there are high levels of crime as well. So there's a lot of challenges that the middle class is facing. As matters stand, your statistic is very shocking, because now the middle class has to decide what to do with domestic helpers, domestic workers that they employ. Do they let them go to try and protect the houses that they have, or do they let them stay and they fall with them? So, but the first thing that they tend to do is to let the domestic workers go.
And then it's a ricochet effect, and then we start seeing all of the things happening as you're talking about. I mean, that's one example that you give, but there are many, many more where we talk about kids at schools cutting back on a whole bunch of things, and this has a massive problem. So we estimate that the tax-paying middle class in South Africa is about 3 million individuals. We're not talking companies, we're talking individuals. Is that the number that you look at as well?
Yes.
But it's said to be shrinking, though.
Yeah, it's shrinking, because what you find is that what we consider to be, like I said, what we consider to be the middle class, actually, these are professionals. And when they get to work, they tend to be given lower wages. Some of them, when they start, their salaries are not even enough for them to pay tax. So they're not tax paying. They can register as taxpayers, but their entry salaries are not even high enough for them to pay tax. But they will have access to credit, in the sense that for you to start work, you need to wear a suit, you need to look good so that you can, go to work. So what do? what you do is that you get credit from shops so that you can start making ends meet,
Yeah.
So those are the challenges that, particularly in the lower sections of the middle class face. The upper sections of the middle class are high on debt. So the interest rate plays a very big role in determining their expenditures.
Yeah. If we look at the kind of situation that we're in, I suppose a question that needs to be asked to you is, where is the break point for the middle class? Are we near it? Is this a situation that is getting closer and closer for the country?
The last time I checked, where there were massive defaults that took place was when the debt to household disposable income was about 72%. So if it is 70% for some parts of the middle class, it means that part of the middle class is about to massively default on their debt. Yeah. And what we'll see is that once that happens, then it's going to cascade throughout, because one section defaults, then it becomes a cascade throughout in terms of aggregate demand falling, workers losing their jobs, and other parts of the middle class also losing their jobs. So the breaking point for me is that 70%, 70% of debt to household disposable income.
Yeah. We saw, I mean, if we go back and see what happened in the US, when we talk about all of those defaults, when we saw the economic crisis coming in 2008, I mean, is this what we're sitting on the verge of if something is not done urgently?
Yes, if something is not done urgently, we are sitting on a massive default. It's not going to be as catastrophic as the crisis in the US, but what you are going to see is that people are going to suffer in silence, losing jobs, losing cars, kids getting out of school and so forth, silently, because it's not going to be like a massive explosion. Reason being that the banks in South Africa are very resilient. They still have high levels of reserves, high levels of liquidity. They are highly regulated. The Reserve Bank is supervising them very, very strongly. So there's not going to be a banking crisis, but there's going to be a crisis when it comes to households, sustaining themselves.
Yeah, and this is it's a great worry. And I mean, we see that loans, new loans in default up by 17.4% over the last year. Where's government in all of this? Because a question needs to be asked, and it should be asked. Can government do anything at this point, and should they do anything to alleviate the financial strain from the middle class to actually preserve it? And we talk about a very important part of any population in the world, the middle class.
Yeah. So what needs to happen is that government needs to have a comprehensive policy to develop the country. Because policies that target the middle class are not going to be effective if they don't address the entire underdevelopment of the country. The country is extremely underdeveloped compared to where it is in terms of a global ranking GDP. We are in the G20, but we know that there are massive backlogs when it comes to school infrastructure, when it comes to health infrastructure, road infrastructure, rail. You can name even water infrastructure, energy infrastructure. So what we need is a massive. South Africa should be a construction site. And once you have that, then you'll have mass employment being created. And the middle class then plays that spearhead role. Its incomes will rise. The employment is going to increase across the board, including for the middle class. It's going to be strengthened in terms of wealth accumulation and resilience when it comes to shocks, like interest rate shocks. There will be massive savings for the middle class because as they earn higher incomes, there's a point where they start saving more. So you need a massive policy, a growth policy that creates jobs on a mass scale in South Africa. And government is not involved in that at the moment. There's no plan for massive infrastructure development. Yeah. There's no plan for mass rollout of social services to employ even large parts of the middle class professionals and so forth. So government, in my view, is not doing its role. And the private sector, this idea that the private sector is going to create jobs is a myth, because the private sector requires massive aggregate demand and support, infrastructure, skills from government for it to play its role as a profit-making part that creates jobs in the economy. But without government, the private sector cannot do that.
Indeed. One tends to think that government may have run out of ideas, and that's kind of where we're sitting at the moment, Prof. Prof Malikane, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Professor Chris Malikane is an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Witwatersrand, discussing the plight of the middle class in South Africa, and we can see that things are not looking good with regard to the middle class.